Toluchinaz, Switzerland, January 24, 1993. The village has a population of 2,000 people. It has one church, small, stone, the kind of building that has been standing long enough to have absorbed the grief and the joy of generations into its walls. On this particular January morning, the church is full. Outside the village, along the road that leads in from the larger world, the media has gathered. Cameras with long lenses, satellite trucks, journalists from every country that has a journalist to send. The most famous funeral of the decade is happening in a Swiss village of 2,000 people, and the woman being buried has insisted that it happen exactly this way. Inside the church, there are perhaps 100 people, family, close friends, a few UNICEF representatives, Hubert de Givenchy, who has not let go of his composure since he arrived, Robert Wolders, who made a promise and kept it absolutely, and who is keeping it still by being here, upright, present for this final thing. The casket is simple wood. It is covered in white flowers, roses, lilies, and tulips. The tulips are not accidental. The woman in the casket ate tulip bulbs ground into flour in the winter of 1944 because there was nothing else. The flowers that nearly sustained her life are here now to honor its end. This is episode 7, the finale, the funeral, the legacy, and the answer to the only question that matters: who was she, really? The service is everything she asked it to be. No Hollywood. This is not an oversight. It is a deliberate choice communicated clearly while she still had the capacity to communicate clearly. The film industry that shaped her for 30 years is not represented here, not because it did not love her, but because she understood, with the clear pragmatism that was the foundation beneath all the elegance, that this moment belonged to the people who knew her rather than the people who knew Audrey Hepburn. The distinction had always mattered. Her sons speak. Sean is 32 and has his mother's quality of composure, the capacity to be fully present in a devastating moment without being destroyed by it. He speaks about her as a mother. The woman who drove him to school in an ordinary car, helped with homework at the kitchen table, attended every school event, and made the sustained effort of being a real presence in his life rather than a famous one. He speaks about what she taught him, which was the same thing she taught about everything: be kind, help people, pay attention to what actually matters. Luca is 22 and does not attempt composure. He speaks through tears with the honesty of someone who has not yet learned that grief can be managed, and his honesty is its own form of tribute, the complete love of a young man for a mother who chose him deliberately, who underwent a pregnancy her doctors had warned might not be possible at 41 because she wanted him, who had spent his entire life making him feel that his existence was the best thing that had happened to her. It was. She had said so many times, and she meant it. Robert speaks briefly. He does not try to enumerate what he has lost. There are no adequate words, and he is too honest to attempt inadequate ones. He speaks about her kindness, about the specific daily kindness that was not the performance of a generous spirit, but the expression of one, the way she noticed what people needed and provided it without requiring acknowledgement, the way she was present with suffering without flinching, the way she moved through the world, leaving it slightly better in every small transaction as well as every large one. Givenchy sits in the front pew and cannot speak. 40 years of friendship have ended, and the ending is too recent and too complete for public words. He brought flowers instead, the extravagant, specific flowers of a man who has communicated through aesthetic choices his entire life. He will carry her with him for the remaining 25 years of his life, and in every interview he gives about her, he will use the same word everyone uses: angel. The burial is in the small cemetery adjoining the church. Her plot is modest. Nothing in the design of the grave marker announces its occupant's significance to anyone who does not already know her name. The dates, clean simplicity that was, in the end, her signature in everything. The village receives her back into itself the way a village of 2,000 receives one of its own, with the warmth of a small community that knew her as a neighbor, not an icon. the woman who shopped at the local market on Saturday mornings, drove her sons to school, gardened with genuine attention, and existed in this place with the relief of someone who had finally found the location that matched her interior life. After the burial, the family returns to La Paisible. They sit in the rooms where she lived. Her books are where she left them. Her UNICEF photographs are on the walls, the faces of children she held, the evidence of what she did with the last 4 years of her life. Her garden is dormant and bare outside, waiting for spring. The house is full of her and empty of her simultaneously, in the particular way of houses from which a life has just departed. Sean and Luca and Robert sit together in the silence and understand that this is where grief begins. Not in the hospital, not in the final weeks, not even in the church, but here, in the ordinary rooms where the extraordinary woman who inhabited them is everywhere and nowhere at once. To understand what Audrey Hepburn left behind, it is necessary to understand that she built 3 entirely distinct things, each one extraordinary, each one connected to the others in ways that only become fully visible when the complete arc of the life is laid out. The films first, because they came first, 31 of them across 4 decades. Roman Holiday in 1951 when she was 22, and William Wyler was directing her through a performance that neither yet understood was going to win an Oscar, and announced the arrival of something genuinely new in cinema. She plays Princess Anne, a young royal who escapes her official duties for a single, unguarded day in Rome, falls briefly and completely in love, and returns to her obligations with the sadness of someone who has glimpsed what freedom feels like and understands she cannot keep it. The performance is technically accomplished in ways that impressed professionals. What it did to audiences was something technique alone cannot explain. People watched Audrey Hepburn in Roman Holiday and felt, with an immediacy that bypassed critical analysis, that they were watching someone real, not an actress performing realness, a person whose realness the camera had captured. She was real. Everything she had survived, the war, the hunger, the abandonment, and had produced a person with no false layers, no manufactured depth. When the camera found her, it found someone who was actually there. The films that followed built on this foundation with the discipline of an actress who understood exactly what she had. Sabrina in 1954, The Nun's Story in 1959, her most demanding dramatic performance, Sister Luke wrestling with faith and the question of whether institutional obedience can contain a genuine individual conscience. Breakfast at Tiffany's in 1961, Holly Golightly, the construction of an icon that outlasted the film itself, that image, that morning on Fifth Avenue, that particular quality of elegant loneliness rendered visible by someone who understood it from the inside. Wait Until Dark in 1967, her last major role, her bravest performance, her 5th Oscar nomination, a blind woman terrorized in her apartment, stripped of every aesthetic advantage, required to be raw and physical and frightened. She was extraordinary. The Academy nominated her and gave the award to someone else, as it had a habit of doing, but the performance exists independently of any award and always will. The films are watched today not as period pieces, but as what they actually are, records of a specific human presence that the camera happened to be running when it was present. New generations discover them on streaming services and respond to Audrey with the same immediacy that audiences did in 1953. Realness does not date. That was always the secret. The fashion second because it came from the films and became something larger. The Givenchy partnership began in 1953 and ended only when she died, 40 years. He gave her clothes that allowed her to be completely herself. Clean lines, simple construction, the absence of decoration understood not as deprivation, but as precision, the recognition that elegance is selection rather than addition. She wore them in ways that made the selection look inevitable, as if the clothes and the person inside them had been designed simultaneously for each other. The little black dress from Breakfast at Tiffany's is the most famous garment in cinema history. This sounds like hyperbole and is not. The dress, the scene, the image of Audrey Hepburn on Fifth Avenue in the early morning have been reproduced on more surfaces in more contexts than any other costume in the history of the medium. It changed what women wore. Before 1961, a black dress was for specific occasions, formal, somber, restricted by convention. After 1961, every woman in the world understood that simplicity was sophistication, that elegance was a matter of restraint rather than elaboration. Fashion designers in 2023, 60 years after the dress, 30 years after her death, still cite her as a primary reference. The accessibility of the aesthetic is part of its permanence. It is not haute couture available only to the wealthy. It is a set of principles that anyone can approximate. Simplicity, clean lines, quality over quantity, elegance as attitude rather than expenditure. She democratized elegance. She made it a matter of character rather than wealth. The humanitarian work third, and the humanitarian work is the part of the legacy that grows rather than simply endures. 4 years, 50+ countries. The specific, measurable impact of a woman who understood that her fame was a tool and used it with the precision of someone who had lived long enough to know what tools are for. UNICEF's accounting of her impact is not sentimental. The organization tracks outcomes, donations, program funding, children reached, mortality rates in the regions where their work operates. The accounting of what Audrey's missions generated in terms of financial resources that funded programs that kept specific children alive produces numbers that millions does not adequately represent, but that millions is the closest approximation, not metaphorical millions. Actual individual children who received food, vaccines, clean water, medical care, because a woman with a famous face went to the places where they were dying and made the world pay attention. She created, almost single-handedly, the template for what celebrity humanitarian work can be when done with complete seriousness. Before Audrey, famous people occasionally attached their names to charitable causes, attended galas, lent their images, wrote checks. After Audrey, there was a different possibility, a person who used their fame not as a fundraising mechanism at a comfortable distance from suffering, but as a reason to be physically present in the worst places, to bear witness, to ensure that their face and their tears appeared in the newspapers of people who had been skimming past the aid organization advertisements. Angelina Jolie has said explicitly that Audrey Hepburn was her model. The list of celebrity activists who point to Audrey as the origin of their understanding of what this work can be is long and consistent. She built the template. They have been following it ever since. The question that 30 years of continued cultural relevance demands an answer to is not what she did, but why it still matters. Lots of actresses have made important films. Lots of public figures have done charitable work. Lots of fashion icons have influenced how people dress. The combination is as rare, but not unique. Why does Audrey Hepburn specifically continue to mean something to people who were not born when she was working, who know her only through the images and films that remain? The answer begins with survival. Most public figures construct their public personas from the material of comfortable lives, talent, ambition, opportunity. The persona is real in the sense that it reflects genuine qualities, but it is not tested in the way that extreme experience tests a person. Audrey Hepburn's character was not constructed, it was forged. The composure that was not coldness, the elegance that was not vanity, the compassion that was not performance, these were the direct products of what she had survived. The Hunger Winter did not merely give her a story to tell, it produced the specific person she became, in the way that extreme experience produces character rather than simply shaping it. When people respond to Audrey, when they feel watching Roman Holiday or looking at the Tiffany's image or reading about the UNICEF missions, that they are encountering something real, they are right. They are encountering a person whose depth was earned through private suffering, not manufactured for public consumption. The camera found that depth and recorded it, and the recordings persist. And the depth is still there 60 years later. She chose meaning at every point where fame would have been easier. In 1967, she walked away from Hollywood at 38, young enough to have continued indefinitely, successful enough that the offers would never have stopped. She walked away because the work was no longer feeding her. She chose Switzerland and her sons and the garden and the ordinary mornings. This choice, Voluntary, complete, executed without drama, is one of the most genuinely countercultural acts of her era in an industry that defines people by their continued relevance and treats departure as failure. She chose meaning again in 1988 when the UNICEF call came, and she said yes before the call was finished. She was 58 years old. She had peace. She had Robert. The UNICEF work was going to cost her that peace, would require her to go back into the world, into its worst places, to see things the retired wife in the Swiss Valley was not required to see. She went anyway, because the children needed her, and the debt was not yet paid, and she was constitutionally incapable of choosing comfort over the thing that was required of her. This is the quality that every generation responds to regardless of how they encounter her. She was not performing goodness. She was not curating an image of compassion. She was simply, consistently, at every significant juncture of her life, choosing the thing that mattered over the thing that was easier. In an era of social media and carefully constructed public personas and the relentless optimization of how one appears to the world, Audrey Hepburn represents something that the era cannot manufacture. A person who was the same in private as in public, whose interior life was consistent with her exterior presentation, who had nothing to hide because she had examined what she was and made peace with it. The war gave her this, the hunger and the fear, and the father who left, and the years of occupation that should have broken her, and instead produced, through some alchemy that cannot be entirely explained, a person of extraordinary clarity. A person who knew, because she had experienced the alternative, exactly what mattered and what did not. The rest of her life was the expression of that knowledge. She survived hell. She chose grace. She stayed real. She completed the circle. These are not small things. These are the things people are looking for when they look for models of how to live, and Audrey Hepburn provides them with a completeness and a specificity that no abstraction can match. 30 years after her death, the grave in Tolochenaz receives visitors every day. They come from every country. They leave flowers, and among the flowers, always tulips. They leave notes that the rain eventually absorbs and which are replaced by new notes from new visitors. They stand at the modest stone marker with her name and her dates and feel whatever it is they feel, which is different for each of them, but is consistently something that brought them here from wherever they came from. The young women who carried the Tiffany's poster on their dorm room wall. The older women who saw Breakfast at Tiffany's in a theater in 1961. The people who came because of the UNICEF legacy, who followed a link about celebrity humanitarianism and found themselves 3 hours later booking flights to Switzerland. The granddaughters brought by grandmothers who want to explain, standing in front of a grave, what elegance actually means. They come because she is not over. This is the clearest evidence available that a life has achieved something permanent. Not the awards, not the critical retrospectives, but the simple fact that people who were not born when she was working are moved enough by her to travel to a Swiss village and stand at her grave and feel something they could not have articulated before they arrived. The films remain. Roman Holiday is as watchable in 2023 as it was in 1953. The precise definition of a timeless work. Breakfast at Tiffany's generates new viewers every year who discover, as if for the first time, that the fire escape scene and the rain scene constitute something close to perfection in the representation of loneliness inhabited by someone determined not to acknowledge it. The fashion endures with a persistence that defies the usual life cycle of influence. What was stylish in 1965 is unwearable in 1975 and ironically reclaimed in 1985. The Audrey aesthetic operates outside this cycle because it was never entirely a trend. It was a set of principles that preceded fashion and will outlast it. These are not fashion choices. They are aesthetic philosophy, and philosophy does not go out of style. The UNICEF legacy grows. The Spirit of Audrey Award, established in her memory, is given to humanitarian workers who embody what she brought to the work: the willingness to be physically present in the worst places, the absence of celebrity distance, the understanding that bearing witness is itself a form of action. The recipients understand what they are being asked to emulate. The children she saved are adults now. Most of them do not know her name. In Ethiopia and Somalia and Bangladesh and Sudan and El Salvador, the men and women who were infants and small children in the late 1980s and early 1990s, who received food and vaccines funded by the donations her missions generated, are living their lives in the ordinary way of people who survived what they were not supposed to survive. They have children of their own. They go to work. They tend their own gardens. They do not know that a woman in a black dress at a jewelry store window in 1961 became famous enough to walk into their dying country in 1988 and make the world pay attention. They just know they survived. She would not have wanted them to know. She would have wanted them simply to live. Audrey Hepburn. 1929 to 1993, 63 years, 3 lives, 1 woman, perfect arc, the war child. First, Brussels, 1929, the occupation, the hunger, the tulip bulbs, the father who left, the winter that reduced her to 88 pounds and the edge of survival, the British soldiers who came in spring with food, the stranger who handed her bread. She survived. She was saved by people who owed her nothing. The Hollywood legend next, the Oscar at 24. The films that defined an era, the Givenchy partnership, the Tiffany's image, the fashion revolution. 30 years during which she was the most recognizable face of her generation, wearing that recognition with the lightness of someone who knew it was not the most important thing about her. The humanitarian angel last, the woman who remembered 1945 for 43 years and was then given the opportunity to pay it forward and took it without hesitation. The 50 countries, the millions of children, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The dying children in Somalia held with the same love she gave her own sons. The debt paid, the circle closed, 3 lives, all necessary, all connected. The war created the compassion. Hollywood created the platform. UNICEF created the meaning. Remove any one of them and the others cannot be fully understood. She left behind films that will be watched for as long as there are people who watch films. A fashion legacy that will be referenced for as long as there are people who care about how women present themselves to the world. And a humanitarian legacy that is, in the final accounting, the most extraordinary thing any famous person has ever done with their fame. Not the donation of money or the lending of a name, but the complete commitment of a presence and a grief that was entirely genuine to the work of ensuring the debt she owed was paid in full. In the small cemetery in Tolochanaz, the stone marker says only what stones need to say. Her name, the years she lived, the tulips are almost always fresh. She would have found this excessive. She would have been quietly grateful, and she would have thought about the children in Somalia and hoped that the people standing at her grave would give a little money to UNICEF before they went home. She was a war child who survived everything, an icon who stayed real, a woman who knew from the time she was 15 years old eating tulip bulbs in occupied Arnhem exactly what mattered and what did not, and who spent the rest of her life arranging herself accordingly. She was Audrey Hepburn. And she is forever. This has been Legends of America. If Audrey's story moved you, if it reminded you that grace is possible, that survival is not the end of the story but the beginning, that one life fully lived is enough to change the world, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for the next series. There are more legends waiting. And every one of them has something to teach us about who we are and what we can become. This is Legends of America. Thank you for watching.